Welcome to your online source for calculator tutorials. In this tutorial, we will learn how to change the window settings for a particular plot. We will use this skill repeatedly throughout the semester to obtain an optimal view of most plots. Let's begin by entering a couple of equations in the y=, editor. We'll start off by entering a linear equation, 20x plus 100. And then let's go down to y2 and enter a quadratic equation, 50x minus x squared. For this problem, we're going to think of y1 as being a cost equation and y2 as being a revenue equation. We're also going to stipulate that the value of x here is the number of items being produced, and we're only interested in production values between 0 and 50. So that gives us kind of a range on our x value here. That's going to be important when setting up a window, and most problems that you'll work on this semester will kind of guide you towards some idea of what the x values could be. If you don't really have a good idea of what the x values could be for a particular problem, then setting up the window becomes a little bit challenging. Alright, go ahead and hit graph just so you can see what we currently have. Remember, the graph defaults to a very particular view. It's only -10 to 10 in both directions. Therefore, for a graph like this where the numbers are a little bit bigger, you're going to see next to nothing. Alright, go ahead and go back into the window button now. We're actually going to set up this graph so we can see everything. There's a couple of things you need to be aware of here. First is, because the x values represent production values, it doesn't make any sense to think of negative values. And in fact, the graph that we're looking at here is best viewed in the first quadrant anyway, because everything in the problem is positive. So right there, that tells you that your x minimum should be 0 and your y minimum should be 0, because negative values don't really make much sense in this problem. In fact, a lot of the problems that we're going to look at this semester, that's the case. Alright, I said before, the way we've set up this problem, I'm thinking about it in terms of production, and I'm saying I only care about it for the first 50 items. So in that way, you know that I only want to look at x value, which are production values, from 0 up to 50. Now, one thing to be aware of here is that if you look at x scale and y scale, those are scale variables, meaning they're the variables which place the tick marks along the graph. If I leave my x scale at 1, because there's a 0 to 50 range along the x-axis, that'll give me 50 tick marks. Instead, what would be a better use for that variable would be to make it 10. That way there's 5 tick marks across the bottom. Alright, how about the y variable? Well, the y variable is very much dependent upon the equations that you're graphing. So if I go back to my y=, and I look, this 20x plus 100 cost function, I know it's linear, therefore it starts at 100 at its y-intercept, and it just grows from there. In fact, if I let it grow all the way out to x = 50, 20 times 50 is 1,000, plus 100 is 1,100. Well, I can take that knowledge that I'm at least going to get up to $1,100 in cost to go back to my window and say, well, my y value, which represents, cost and revenue here, my y value should be at least 1,100, and it's always a good idea to make it a little bit bigger than you need. So let me go ahead and make it 1,200. I'm going to at least have $1,200 worth of either cost or revenue in this problem, so it's a good place to start. Alright, as for the y scale, since we're talking about 1,200 or 1,000 here, my y scale needs to be in terms of 100. Alright, so if you go back to graph now, you should see a much better representation of what's going on for this problem. You can notice that we actually do have a quadratic function here. It's a revenue function. It's increasing for a while, then it's decreasing, and then we have the straight linear cost function. Now, we got this on the first try. Okay, that's not normally going to be the case because there's really a bit of an art, a little bit of trial and error involved in setting up a window for a graph. Keep practicing this skill. as it's one that'll come up several times over the course of the semester. And it's very hard for most students to completely master this idea. Alright, this concludes the Changing Window Settings tutorial. Feel free to replay this tutorial or browse any of the other available topics on the course webpage.